Oh, okay.
Yes.
I move the camera a little bit, yeah, hand, a little more, a little more, a little more, a little bit more. Good. Oh, all that's been recorded. All right, so we got lots of stuff happening here.
Oh,
Okay.
I don't know.
All right, here we go. First thing is first. Tomorrow, DBQ. I'll walk it out. The DBQ stacked on the desk. As soon as you get here, you can start. You have the period. You can, I beg you, write on the documents. Go through it. When you read the documents, jot down material related to what you know, put it in context, because you have to be able to paraphrase it. You have to be able to put it in your own words and relate it to your thesis statement. You have to connect it, briefly explain it, connect it. And you have the period to write it in. Yes, you need paper, and it must be written in what? Pen. Very good. Did we get to this? We got the firestorm. We got. So we have got.
Yeah, we haven't gotten.
Yeah, we got some. I showed you this.
Yeah.
And did I show you this?
Yeah.
All right. So, where did the United States and Britain demand unconditional surrender? Yeah, the Potsdam Declaration. And also at Potsdam, what did Truman inform Stalin of? The atomic bomb. And what did Stalin tell the United States and Britain?
Use it on Japan.
No, what did Stalin tell, you guys went too fast, tell the United States and Britain about Eastern Europe?
No.
And what did the United States and Britain say about reparations?
No reparation.
All right, so, and you can argue that's the beginning of the Cold War. Who cut off supplies to Japan almost completely? What weapons? Submarines. And what happened on the night of March 9th and 10th of 1945 in Tokyo?
Firebomb.
Yeah, that awful firebomb. And it's really important. Oh, and Japan sent peace feelers. And what was their one big condition? Now, we're not 100% sure they would have surrendered, but what was their one big condition? And remember, at Potsdam, we hinted in the Potsdam Declaration, maybe, but didn't quite say it. What did Japan do when they got the Potsdam Declaration? Yeah, they ignored it. Now, they were expecting another response. We saw it as they were blowing it off. And that's a cultural thing, which, yeah, that stuff happens when you fight a horrible war and you're not talking. And so, did we get to this? How many casualties did Truman say the United States would have had if they invaded Japan? Yeah, so he exaggerated immensely, even though, let's be clear, he was only talking about U.S. casualties, and the casualties, of course, would have been outrageously high. But he made it higher, which, of course, is incredibly misleading for very particular reasons. So, just 2 days later, the Soviets were going to come in August 15th. When the United States dropped the atomic bomb, but oh God, we got to go now. And so they hurried it 1 week and began a massive offensive in Manchuria, the largest military offensive in history. And they also had the fastest advance in history. The Soviet army hit the Japanese army called the Kuomintang Army with a massive onslaught. And they went, in fact, when the war ended, they conquered immense amounts of territory, faster than any advance in history. Now, the Japanese army, they had been pulling men out of Manchuria, and these weren't the relatively elite forces on the islands, like Iwo Jima, dug into mountains and into the ground, into tunnels all over on an island. These are men on high plateaus, facing one of the most advanced militaries in the world, very experienced. And they didn't have near the heavy weapons like the Germans did. It wasn't even close. You know, the Japanese army, they could fight on islands because they could dig in, not here. This hit Japan the Japanese cabinet the same time they realized that the bombing of Hiroshima might have been one or just a few bombs. And that blew them away. This one dominated their talk. Remember, they joined the Axis with Italy and Germany as an anti-communist pact. They despised and feared the communists, they feared the Soviets, and now this massive offensive is coming and they knew they couldn't stop it. And I should add, even after the Japanese surrender, the Soviets kept going and into Korea, where they hastily would just put a line here and say, okay, we'll divide Korea into two occupation zones, which are now today North and South Korea. That was a Japanese colony since 1894. This dominated talk. And then the very next day, Nagasaki. This was actually the third target. The first two were cloudy. And so the plane, box-car, not box. Sounds like it just did the same thing over again. It had to go to the third target. The other two were cloudy. Nagasaki was not an ideal target for one bomb because it had mountains. It was the terrain was not even, so the explosion would be absorbed by the mountains or the hills. And since it was a third target, they set the bomb to explode on the ground. So the ground absorbed a lot of the shockwave. It was horrific. But even though this bomb was 21 kilotons, it was significantly bigger than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The hills absorbed much of the blast. Still, almost 50% of Nagasaki was destroyed. Here is Batman. It's the plutonium. What was the code name for the first bomb? Now we call it. So this Trinity bomb. And I'm disconcerted by the fact that the bomb was kind of yellowish orange. Aren't they supposed to be black? But this one was yellowish orange. And if you look back there on the windowsill, years ago in my special topics class, students made an atomic bomb pinata. And we decided not to destroy it. Only reason we didn't destroy it is because she put a hole in it to put the candy in, so we took the candy out. We probably would have destroyed it to get the candy. I mean, we're practical. So I kept the atomic bomb pinata. I've always enjoyed that. So that is from the tail turret of the B-20, one of the escorting B-29s as it hit. This would kill about 45,000 people, and obviously significantly more afterwards, but we're not 100% sure. They actually missed the target areas. Windy, they were hasty, they were worried they might have to avoid dropping the bomb, and they weren't sure what to do about landing with the atomic bomb. They were significantly more dangerous than the Air Force ever let out for 50 years. And they're supposed to hit about here, and then hit about here. You can tell what happened to Nagasaki. Just absolutely devastating. And so those were the two atomic bombs. Why did we drop two atomic bombs? Because we had two. If we would have had three, we probably would have dropped three. Because when you drop two, it implies what? You have third, fourth, fifth, you have more. We actually didn't have any more for at least a couple months. Maybe they could have put one together earlier, but they still hadn't quite figured out the production yet. And so it implies they had more. A couple of things I'll tell you. For example, many of the scientists in Los Alamos suggested, this is all top secret, obviously, but suggested before the dropping, why don't we just do it on an island, like an uninhabited island, and blow the island up, tell the Japanese, if you don't surrender, this is Tokyo the next day. So to avoid the thousands of casualties. This was turned down for one basic reason. Just imagine they made a big deal about bombing the island, which is now my rug. Don't worry, we're not actually going to destroy the rug. So here comes the plane, they drop the bomb, and thud, it does nothing. Then we look like idiots. It doesn't work, they won't. If not only the US, the Japanese, but the Soviets, we think we're morons. And so it's better to do it without warning, so if it fails, nobody knows outside of this tiny circle that were involved. That's why they did it that way. They dropped them quickly. We did continue to fire bombing in between the two bombings, and we kept fire bombing after the two bombings, and there was a couple aircraft carrier raids on the Japanese islands after the main bombing. So it's not like we quit, like, time out, now we'll give you, no, we kept going. In fact, the day they surrendered, when it finally became official, there was a firebombing raid on the way. They could see Mount Fuji, but they were turned back at the last second. They were going to bomb if the Japanese were not surrendered. So those did not quit. We kept killing thousands of people until the war ended, we as the United States. And so Japan did surrender on the 14th, put down VJ days on the 15th. 15th. Japan surrendered, 14th VJ Day on the 15th. There's a celebration. There's New York at Times Square. There's San Francisco. And there's the misery in Tokyo. And you can see the destruction behind them of hearing on the radio that they have quit the fight. The Army, junior officers, and obviously had some help with the high command, actually tried to overthrow the government and force Japan to stay in the war. But the emperor, whose voice the people of Japan had never heard, this is a picture of him giving an address, and he sounded shaky and scared. You know, he was this pampered, isolated man who was all for the Japanese invasion, but had really no interest in the government. But he was seen as this living god. That's the whole Bushido thing. They heard his voice for the first time saying, "We must accept the unacceptable." And that convinced enough of the army to agree. That is why, even though the whole issue about the emperor and the condition in Japan was talking about maybe surrendering, except for that, you know, except surrender completely, except keep our emperor, the army might not have allowed it. We don't know. We just don't know. There were fanatics in the army, not so much the Navy, but the army. And so, with Japan surrendering, 3 weeks later, the former surrender ceremony would be on the USS Missouri. I love the picture of all the sailors, all their dressed whites, and watching the surrender. Looking from above, there's Douglas MacArthur, who accepted the surrender from the Japanese. He'd be the overall commander and a 5-star general, overall commander of U.S. Army forces in the Southwest Pacific. And so the Arizona, which turtled and sunk, which is not only a memorial, but it is a tomb for the sailors inside. That is one of the most hallowed ground in the United States at Pearl Harbor, 500 yards away, the Missouri. Now a memorial too. So they're right next to each other, which worked out pretty well. It's part of the Pearl Harbor that the U.S. Navy doesn't use anymore. It's still an active Navy base. And so the war is over. Now, it is really arguable. What was the biggest reason Japan surrendered? Was it the atomic bomb, or was it the Soviets? But it's important to understand to the Japanese, as awful as the atomic bomb was, they still looked at it as the same way they looked at the firebombs. More Japanese cities destroyed, thousands were killed. What freaked them out was the Soviet invasion. When the Soviets occupied, they would much rather have the United States occupied. That was the cold calculus. And remember, they had been defeated for months. So, hey, an outline for DBQ. That's going to be so much fun. You guys get to do a DBQ on this. I've given you lots of material. And when you come in, you'll get the documents. You have to do a brainstorm list. There has to be over 10 things. I am grading that. I'm not going to go through and pick out everyone to be exactly about that issue, but you have to have over 10 facts written down. And I know you say, well, I'm going to write the essay. Yeah, I know. So write a brainstorm list. Those are things that you have to have in the essay, and hopefully you will not forget. And then you must do a quick outline. And so this is the basic things you have to have in the outline. You make sure you have your thesis, and then have the topics. Now for this, DBQ, and this is something I'm picking up from what I get from the College Board of National. I think this will be easy for you since they made some changes this year. So ideally, you know, if you can get 3 body paragraphs, that's great. But if you feel confident that you can get 4 documents, meaning 2 in each body paragraph, and 2 good examples of outside information in 2 body paragraphs, go with 2. They're going to be big paragraphs, but go with 2. They'll save you a little bit of time, and I know you can get good essays. It's just a good idea if you know you have a little bit more time. That 3rd paragraph where you get a little more information and another document. The big thing about another document is you're kind of hedging your bets, just in case one of your documents don't work. But this one, you can do a 2-paragraph essay too. You can do it on the test as long as you're confident and get 4 documents. as evidence. And so that means, remember how we do with a thesis statement, we have an A, B, and C for your topics. You just need an A and a B. Does everyone hear what I said? You can do it for this one. And there is an incredible hint on Teams for you. An incredible hint. So the essay is basically going to be a statement, and you have to take a position on it. There's an incredible hint on Teams. And so make sure you have the document, a brief explanation. Can you quote? One time you can use 5 words, maybe, but really fits. Other than that, your words, no quotes. And make sure you have brief explanation, but then show how you support the thesis, basically your topic. You need a couple documents as evidence, and then one example of outside information outside the documents. And one more thing, do not forget. Do not forget this. When you write your essay for your body paragraphs, and you have a topic sentence with your subtopic, you still need a sentence to explain that. Then you give the evidence. You need a sentence to explain. So if your document's going to be about something like you want to have the United States to force Japan to unconditionally surrender, but they will not quit, you need a sentence to explain what that is. Not just your topic sentence, you need a sentence. And then you need, don't forget the last thing, context, the background material. So if the essay is about dropping the atomic bomb, the decision behind it, context are events leading up to it. About the war, what happened in the Pacific, maybe a little bit about Germany. In the last paragraph, what happened? Cold War, surrender of Japan. We'll get to a few. Sound good? Why don't you just do it now? So you have to have brainstorm, quick write it. I know you guys are going to do well. Oh, put a little star by the HAP. Remember HAP? You must explain why the document had that, or why Harry Truman believed this because of his purpose, his point of view, historical context. Be specific on it. You ready for this? All right. Oh, one more thing. Don't forget, cite your documents. Doc A, Doc B at the end of the sentences you use them on. Everyone? All right. Now, you have this. And there's a picture of this on Teams. It is there. It is on Teams. I have a copy of this. You have it. I gave it to you once already. And it's in that study guide. For those of you not taking the exam, there is a copy of that study guide, a PDF on Teams. Let's move on to the Cold War.
And through the Cold War will heat up.
I just like all that. The Cold War gets hot. And here it is Stalin leading the Eastern Europeans, and here's what's going to be called the Marshall Plan, and Truman showing our wares. How good the Western system is. So, one thing about the Cold War, you could argue it began right after the war, early in '46, when the United States started doing all these atomic tests. So they made a bunch more Trinity bombs, and they started to explode them. They forcibly removed people off a little tiny island in the Marshalls called Bikini Atoll. It's near Eniwetok and Kwajalein, where there was some pretty heavy fighting in 1943 and 44. And they did a number of tests. They took some old, obsolete US ships, some Japanese ships that were captured. They put a bunch of animals on them to see the effects of the radiation. That's one sheep that before it was exploded. Yeah, so they murdered a bunch of animals. And they tested the bomb over ships, in the water. This is the underwater test. And they also got some old submarines. They anchored, so they'd be just submerged below the water to see what it would do to them. They exploded on the island. Yes, they forcibly removed the people who lived there. And this became a big deal, Bikini Atoll. And everyone talked about all these explosions. Now, yeah, part of it was to figure out the bomb and figure out safety mechanisms. They really never figured out the safety mechanisms for the bombs to the 1980s. I'm really glad I didn't know how close many times they had to bombs falling out of B-52s and nearly blowing up Air Force bases, cities in North Carolina, the coastline of Spain. One bomb fell out and nearly started World War III over Greenland. Yeah, the bombs were so dangerous. They're much better now. And it's really in the news. So the French fashion industry is starting, and so I'm going to show you a piece of clothing, the very first one, who got its name from this. A French designer was watching this. Bikini was in the news, so therefore that is the first bikini. And it came from Bikini Atoll. So that's our fashion statement for today. Ah, the French. So if you ever wonder why that swimming suit has that name, it's because of the atomic explosions on Bikini Atoll. And so, the peace began to collapse very quickly. It already was a hot state. And we had a number of things. Truman was desperate to get tough. He felt he had been browbeaten by Stalin and wanted to get him. In fact, going into 46, he said to his new Secretary of State, a friend from the Senate named James Byrne, about babying the Soviets. We can't let them get away with what they want. And I should add, Stalin's thinking the exact same thing. They are browbeating and trying to make us do stuff, and we are stuck on their Lend-Lease aid. Well, remember, Germany's divided by 4 powers, but Berlin is divided. So the French, British, and American occupation zones had a railroad, a road, and an air corridor. And Stalin started using this as leverage. He wanted to pressure the United States, and therefore the rest of the West, to create a Germany that would have been much closer to what Stalin wanted. So we do things like shut down the road for a while into Berlin. Little things as a nuisance. And Berlin was destroyed. So here's a town of 3 million people, and they have no food, very little shelter. They need every bit of supplies. Well, Germany is destroyed. And there's another thing too. The U.S. the U.S. wouldn't allow for reparations. So Stalin decided, okay, we want our reparations, I'll take it from Germany. In the Eastern occupation zone, they stripped everything of value in the Soviet occupation zone. Everything. I mean, literally everything. So they went into houses, if they weren't destroyed, and they took out the toilets. They took out the sinks. They pried out nails, boards that looked good. They even cut out hunks of the Autobahn and put them on trains and sent it all back to Russia. That was Stalin's way of saying, okay, Germany, if you won't give reparations, I'll take it. And this angered Truman because the West is thinking, you do that to Germany, it might lead to conditions that led to fascism. And so they stripped East Germany and the U.S. cut off aid. And I didn't put this down, so put down Lend-Lease aid. So the Lend-Lease aid that started in 41, so put down Lend-Lease. Roosevelt promised to continue this indefinitely, basically as payment for not having the reparations and the hell that the Soviet Union went through. The United States never really understood this throughout much of the Cold War. But all this area, it was just a ruin. It was destroyed by the war. So Lend-Lease. And this is the first time it started getting to the newspapers that people in the United States in 46 began to realize, wow, maybe we're not all buddies. And then the biggie hit. It was Greece. Oh, almost forgot. So, at the same time, former Prime Minister, still member of Parliament, Winston Churchill did a tour of U.S. colleges. So he's a member of Parliament. He was much more beloved in the United States and Britain after the war. Much more. And so he's giving these speeches. And here he is in Southwest Missouri State. Harry Truman's from Missouri, so Harry Truman's going to speak. That's why it has this for the President of the United States. And Churchill made this comment that was picked up on newspapers all over the United States. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic. From Stettin to Trieste, an Iron Curtain. So we got the Iron Curtain. And that became areas under Soviet domination. And there's a term I have to give you. they begin to call these countries then under Soviet domination, where by 48, it's going to have Stalinist governments. They'll call these satellite nations. Satellite nations. Basically, they're in the orbit of the Soviet Union. So if you ever hear or see satellite nations referring to this, in this context. Now, he didn't make this term, he didn't make this statement up, but it became popular because of this statement. He probably got it from the head of German propaganda, Joseph Goebbels. And Goebbels said it, actually broadcast it out by radio in 45, trying to get the British and the Americans to join against Bolshevism when the war was almost over. And so this will become the Iron Curtain. You notice Yugoslavia was not part of it, even though Churchill said it. Their communist partisans, guerrillas, liberated Yugoslavia on their own. The Soviets didn't liberate it. So they were never under Soviet domination. Yes, they had a totalitarian regime there, and when their leader Tito died, 10 years later, it'd be a civil war. So, Turkey and Greece. Now, they will go together, Turkey and Greece. Put down, I didn't put down the year, 46, 47. The whole issue was actually Greece. There was a communist revolution, a rebel group in Greece. Communists had fought against German occupation, and then when the British installed, so Britain installed a military dictatorship in Greece. Britain wanted a pro-British government, basically to British interests. Britain still controlled the Suez Canal, and you also notice one more thing. Look how close it is to the Dardanelles. The Soviets get there, they're in the Mediterranean. Russia has always wanted this. So there's this revolt. Britain had a puppet state in Greece. The US is pulling their troops out. In fact, by 46, the United States Army and military had gone from almost 11 million men and women in uniform to less than 1 million. And our plan was to get down to about 200,000. We wanted to do what the United States had always been before. In the peacetime, it was not a military power. In peacetime, we did not have a military state. So we're going back. And heck, the men wanted to go home. Now this happened. Britain, though, is completely and totally broke by 2 world wars. And Britain asked the United States to aid them. Basically, Britain said, we don't have the money. We don't have the money to do this. It's no coincidence that same year, Britain is going to lose their biggest colony. What's their biggest colony? India. India is their biggest colony. And that would begin this is the beginnings of decolonization. Countries begin to win their freedom. It's also no coincidence that the British colony of Palestine would erupt in civil war. And in 48, that is where Israel would come from. So, well, the United States has never done this before. But Truman doesn't want U.S. troops at the same time, or doesn't want U.S. troops now to be committed to Europe, and that means a large peacetime army. So he has to aid them. But the problem is this. In the 46 midterm, the Republicans did really well. For the first time since 1930, a Republican, and it was very conservative. Many of the liberal Republicans that had been there in the 20s and 30s had all become Democrats, including their 1940, the 1940 Republican nominee for president, Wendell Willkie, was a Democrat. And they controlled it, and they were very isolationist. So they believed in conservative foreign policy. And there are a lot of conservative Democrats in foreign policy who are just thinking, we've had enough with these international affairs. And this conservative idea, remember we talked about this with the Treaty of Versailles, more unilateral and do not want to get involved in a very complex world, so they just see things as we're going to do things for the United States and that's it. So very bipolar. So they're isolationists. I should add one thing. Within a decade, the conservative movement in the United States will become more interventionist because they're going to become rabidly anti-communist. And they were anti-communist in them, but not quite. They don't want to get involved in international affairs. So Truman has got to convince them to give money to Turkey and Greece. Now you might have said, wait a second, how did we get to Turkey? The communist revolt was in Greece. Turkey was a democratic republic, homegrown, created after World War I. But we included Turkey in this because we wanted Turkey as an ally to block off here. And who knows, maybe there'll be a revolt in Turkey. There was a growing communist party in the newly independent, or I'm sorry, the new democracy in a place called Iran. So they added Turkey. Also, it's more scary. Turkey and Greece, that's scary. So what did he do? He got people, he said, this is not a fight for Greece. This is fear of Stalin. Fear of Stalin. And so what he did is, this cartoon shows it. Stalin like looking at all this, and right here at the Dardanelles, the chain is trying to stop him, trying to take all of this. And so what Truman did is he went to Congress and greatly exaggerated the Soviet threat. He greatly exaggerated, told the Soviets, or told the United States that the Soviets are ready to conquer much of the world, that the Soviets are on their way to attack the United States through Greece and the Western Europe. And here's a cartoon that kind of emphasizes it. Here's Stalin just playing with Western leaders and said this is just a part of a huge battle against the massive Stalinist army. Now, the Soviets were not that strong. Their economy was in shambles because of the war. And one more thing, Stalin, and add this, he discouraged the communist revolt in Greece. He didn't want this. He knew he needed U.S. Lend-Lease aid, and he needed American support. He did not want to risk it, so he didn't support that. But Truman said, I know for a fact this is being directed by Stalin. And we have no idea. Now, the British said it, but the British have no idea. They're just making it up. Well, right before this happened, Truman got a letter from George Kennan, and in it laid out what the United States must do to counter the growing threat of the Soviet Union. Once again, exaggerated. This strategy would be called containment. Containment of communism. George Kennan wrote this. It's called the long letter, but it's actually a telegram. And he was longtime State Department official, would eventually become ambassador to Russia. After the war, he became ambassador to China, ambassador to Japan. It's kind of one of these old hands by the 1960s. There's Kennan right there. And Kennan wrote, the Soviets are bent on world domination and conquest. Never got that. World domination. And so we got to stop them everywhere because they're going to push everywhere. Now, he did not mean military conquest. What he meant was the Soviet system is going to try to prove they're better and say it's a much fairer and better system than the regulated capitalism of the West. And so here's from Time magazine implying like communism is like a disease spreading into these areas, infecting Western Europe, spreading into China, infecting Korea. It's spreading, and we got to stop it everywhere, contain it. Now, Kennan said we must show our system is better. But Truman and everybody else who read this said, well, that means military. And that could be used to justify military spending for Greece. And so, in this speech, asking for money, Truman laid out his foreign policy position. And this will become the most important foreign policy position in American history. We've had two doctrines. Doctrine is not law. It's just the position the president has taken by foreign policy. We had the Monroe Doctrine and now the Truman Doctrine. And it would be the basis of American foreign policy for over 70 years, meaning through this thing. And it was The stated goal was to protect democracy. And what Truman said was, communists, led by Stalin, are threatening fledgling democracies in Turkey and Greece. Did Turkey have, or did Greece have a democracy? No, it had a nasty military dictatorship. And it was an authoritarian, brutal dictatorship. But Truman said, there's a democracy. That's why I put it in quotes. And this will be the basis of foreign policy to this day. Everybody's in the State Department today. When they learned about foreign policy, when they took their foreign relations classes in college and in graduate school, they learned from people who learned from the Truman Doctrine. And it has spread on and on to this day. Heck, our president and whoever's going to be the next president were born before the Truman Doctrine. And so this is the basis. So here are the main points. First one, communism is not a normal threat. It's not like we're fighting the Germans now or the Japanese. It's ideological. It's something that bores its way into your skull and takes you over. Oh, you look the same. And that's how come they could defeat the Germans. And there's one more thing, it's indivisible. What does indivisible mean? Yeah. Basically meaning, if it can't be broken, one communist in Moscow is the same as a communist in Greece, or in China, or in New York City. They're all the same. One and the same. The only way they're different than anyone else is something that bored its way into a skull and changed their belief system. Like a disease, or an alien force took over and dominated you. Gee, I wonder what new strain of movies will come out because of this. I wonder if they're going to start seeing flying saucers. No, I'm sure there's no coincidence with that. Yeah, that's where the UFO flying saucer craze came from, the Truman Doctrine. Thank you, Cold War. And so, number two, why is it a threat? The domino effect. Now, you probably heard it as the domino theory, but Keating called it the domino effect. It wouldn't be to the 60s they called it domino theory. They're the same. You can say, put domino theory, domino effect. The struggle's everywhere because of the domino effect. Because we basically have two sides, good guys and bad guys. And if the good guys lose in one country, what's going to happen to all their neighbors? It'll fall. So just imply that everyone's the same. So here's the good guys. And if one of the good guys fall, it was just spread like a disease to Italy, and then to France, and then to Britain, and then to Ireland, and then what's next? Wyoming. Right to Wyoming. And then everything's lost. And therefore it's a bipolar world. It's a bipolar world. Us versus them. All the maps at this time would be red for the bad guys, the commies, the enslaved world, the second world. What was a good world? Blue. That's why this map, they tried to go away from this when they made this, but they should have made it red and blue because that's where all the maps were. The first world, the free world. Us, blue. So what were all these new countries getting freedom from colonization? And what did they call them? Have you ever heard of the Third World? That's what comes from the Cold War. They were unaligned. So, isn't it simple? Us versus them. Good guys, bad guys. Everything just comes together. You don't need to think, do you? Good for you. Now, let's be clear. Nuance is difficult. But one important thing to understand, the situation in Greece was totally different than the situation in Italy, or the situation in France, or the situation in Britain. And is there anything like the situation in Wyoming? But it's implying it's all the same. It's all the same. So the communist guerrillas in Greece are exactly the same as the communist guerrillas in China. And who's leading them all? Yes. Every revolt, reform movement, even labor union, remember the Red Scare, they could say they're being directed from the Kremlin. And it's Joseph Stalin puffing on his pipe, looking at places around the world and just saying, today we'll have a revolution in Seoul. Tomorrow Buenos Aires, and then Greece. And this cartoon shows it really well. It says Molotov. This is supposed to be Molotov as foreign minister, and it says who's next to be liberated from freedom. And these are all dials of different countries, like each dial-up revolution. Like that's all it takes. When every country has unique situations. Greece had a horrible military dictatorship that was known for arresting and torturing citizens without trial. Soon it would be known for black Ford Galaxies driving around in the middle of the night, picking up people who would be disappeared. Those were our allies. And did it work? Yes. He scared the pants off of the Congress. And write this down. They voted for $450 million in it. He scared them to death. And these are the opposition party. They don't like Truman. Gee, what a big outcome of this whole atomic bomb thing. Huh. Just weird, huh? $450 million to Greece and Turkey. And what was it almost all for? Weapons. And basically what this is total war thinking in peacetime. Once you say the threat is everywhere, it could literally be everywhere. This is crucial. And now we're going to send money to a brutal dictatorship under the guise of protecting democracy with misleading Congress and the American public and scaring them to death. And I should add, it'd be like, oh yes, we're all friends with the Soviets, maybe some disagreements too. They're going to kill us overnight. And all of a sudden we started looking for enemies. And so the US abandoned democracy. Oh sure, we would, right? I'm not saying that we wouldn't have liked more democratic governments, but it might lead to communism, we're going democracy. And this is going to happen all over, where the United States is going to support dictators. It's really going to be a big deal down the road in the Middle East. And it's going to be military focused. That is the US dollar now in the Mediterranean Patrol, Turkey on. And it gave the United States a problem that has been a problem to this day. The United States will claim that we're fighting for democracy, and yet support some of the most brutal dictators who are not communists. Remember, the United States, I've told you this before, will soon support the fascist government in Spain because they're not communists. And this is going to be a big deal in the Middle East. Wow, is this going to be a problem in the Middle East? Because virtually all of America's allies in the Middle East to this day are brutal dictatorships. So, credibility is important. And so a lot of people might begin to believe the United States has ulterior motives. And this would kind of waver back and forth attitude, but this would have real problems. I really like this cartoon. So it's showing Uncle Sam now blindfolded. You notice it has the cane, and it said aid to Greece and Turkey. Blindfolded, and it says New American Foreign Policy. Meaning, this is all new, and we have no idea what we're doing. And there's an element of truth to that. We have no idea. I have no idea. This is all brand new. Our only example is Britain, and Britain just did it for colonies. We're stumbling into something brand new. And domestic politics would never be the same. Fear of communism would become the overriding element of domestic politics. Once Truman said, we have to stop communists in Greece or we'll literally be defending Wyoming to the death. All roads lead to Wyoming. That's why it's rectangular. But I have no idea what that means. But here's the key thing. He made people so afraid. Now, what happens if he goes from, we must do whatever it takes to stop Greece till we're dead, to something else happens in another country, and Truman says, no, we don't need to go to that. We don't need to. We don't need to go to, let me just throw a little country out called China. We don't need to do anything about that. What will his opponent say? A hypocrite, or what's even better, he's a commie. He must be one of them. He must not be a real American. a traitor. No politician from now on could afford to look soft on communism. And soon, Truman is going to be called, maybe not a communist, but a communist sympathetic to communism. What color are the communists? What color? Red. So what kind of red? He's a pinko. And this was very effective for Republicans. There's not been a Republican president since 32. And yes, in the 46 midterm, Republicans would take control of both houses of Congress, but Democrats would sweep back in the next election. And this became an effective tool for the GOP, for the Republicans. And it was literally called red baiting, to call your opponent a communist. So when Richard Nixon would run for the Senate in California against a moderate Democrat by the name of Helen Gahan Douglas, he repeatedly called her the Pink Lady, AKA pro-communist. And it's no coincidence. You drum up this much fear, in 2 years, you have an even more dangerous Red Scare called McCarthyism. Yeah. Grand Old Party, that's a nickname for the Republicans. And I'm so used to it, I don't even realize I do it. You know, GOP and Republican, it's just synonymous in my head. That's when the Republicans, they started winning a number of presidential elections after the Civil War. So they wanted to try to act like they were the older party. When actually the Democrats are a lot older party, but you know, whatever. And this also led, what's a way to show you're tough? Military spending. And then once the Republicans started having success red baiting Democrats, what do you think the Democrats are going to do? And it won't end, and they're just going to ratchet it up. The idea that the United States is going to get involved in a civil war in a brand new country called South Vietnam would have been ridiculous in 1947. And nearly 60,000 Americans are going to die in that war. Why? This kind of domestic politics. No politician wanted to show their soft on communism. And so, after the Cold War ended, we just found a new enemy. Right before the September 11th attack, the George W. Bush administration was ratcheting up fear of China. In fact, an American patrol plane was patrolling so close to China that a Japanese fighter plane rammed it by accident. Just 2 weeks before the September 11th attack. It looked like we might go to war with China. But wait. So, tomorrow. I'm not going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do this lesson tomorrow while you do the DB2. Make sure you have paper throughout the period. I've given you lots of information. I gave you, I think, too much of a hint on Teams, so you better check now before I change my mind. Some of you already know what the hint is. Some of you don't know. Does anyone know what the hint is? Have a great day, everybody. Right when you find work, see you tomorrow. Are you excited? I know, I think so. Hey, we got to write an essay. This is a good topic. This is a good topic. You got to be fine.
I mean, but he was only purely 4 years old.
I knew that would be something that you all, I just knew that. How are you? What do I look like, buddy? What do I look like? Yeah.
I don't want to make an extension, but it's hard to just well, that and then he's not speaking, so like sometimes I'm one who's already up right
No, it's not.
Yeah.
Looks like I kind of do agree with them. Well, I still want to, I'd say, I don't want to go into.
Yeah.
I'm definitely saying for instance.
Should we do a test today? Should we do the DBQ? Let's just do it. Let's just get it over with.
Can I run to the council?
You better run. You better run like.
No running.
No, go. Come on. Don't waste your time.
We're slightly ahead of this, actually.
Good. Are you excited? Let me shop the camp. Everyone say goodbye to our viewing audience. Say goodbye. But that was lame.